All Things DER podcast, brought to you by AEIC. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Cook. In this podcast, I dig in, define, and discuss where the new energy economy is heading with electric industry leaders and explore all the ways that distributed energy resources can modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thank you for joining us. In today's episode, I'm talking with Matt Lundeen, the Manager of Systems Analysis at JEA, Jacksonville's Municipal utility. We discussed the complex challenges that face the utility industry with recent additions of the advancing technologies that bring with them great opportunity for growth when utilized effectively. From the varying levels of maturity in DER across the U.S. to the importance of asking the right questions, embracing innovation to unravel the web of new challenges that arise. We dig into a variety of ways to successfully utilize and manage new DER.
So thank you for joining us today, Matt. So while we're talking about JEA, can you tell me a little bit about your service territory and who you're serving?
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for having me on. This is a privilege to be here. So JEA is a municipal utility in Northeast Florida. We're a not-for-profit community-owned utility. We provide electric services to about 500,000 electric customers, but we also provide water and wastewater services as well. We're about the 8th largest municipal utility or public power utility in the country, among the largest water and wastewater systems. Electrically speaking, we're a vertically integrated utility. So we have everything from generation down to the meter. We've got about 744 miles of transmission lines ranging. We've 69 kV, 138 kV, 230 kV, and distribution-wise, we've got about 7,200 miles of distribution. Our primary distribution voltage is 26.4 kV, which is the majority of the territory. We do have a few legacy, I say legacy, but a few 4 kV stations that are fed from the 26.4 kV system. And our downtown area, we actually have a little bit of a network. We've got both a spot and secondary network, which is served at 13.2 kV. Historically, we've been actually a winter peaking utility, probably pretty interesting being a Florida utility, but ironically, we have. The past couple of years have been rather mild, although this previous January we had a couple of days that were pretty cold, at least cold for us Floridians. And so if I was to think back to about the 2019 timeframe, our loads, our peak demands, winter peak was about 2,500 megawatts. Summer peak was around 2,700 megawatts. I think our all-time highest hourly net integrated system peak demand was about 3,200 megawatts, which happened in January of 2010.
I have to say, other than Duquesne Light, who I work for, our utility is the very same size, but we are not vertically integrated, and we're in the state of Pennsylvania. So for our listeners, I just wanted to kind of share a perspective, because I think a lot of people do not know. We have transmission, which is regulated by the federal government, and there's a lot of oversight and hierarchy. And then we have our distribution system, which is what feeds all of our individual homes, C&I. And from a amount or the number, just to kind of get your perspective, the amount of distribution companies is well over 1,700. I think, and if you break that down, only about 900 munis, and I think there's a little bit over 800 co-ops, which are more or less not your typical like privately owned or funded utilities. Like you're a municipality and a co-op, which is a very different organization, and your board is different, and who make the ultimate decisions in regards to like an IOU, which there's only 260 of those. So when we all talk about DER and where we are in that maturity as we grow from, there's one visual that I always like to talk about. You're crawling and then you're walking and running. So like the West states are probably close to running those energy markets on the distribution, where us over here on the East, even in the sunny state of Florida, you're, what would you say from a maturity level in regards to the technology, like crawling to walking, right? Having that situational awareness.
Yeah, I would most certainly agree with that. I think there's some utilities in Florida that may be on a little bit different place on the curve. But I would say, generally speaking, we are definitely, as you described, we are nowhere near running. That is for sure.
So I'll just ask, what are the DER related items that keep you up at night?
It's a fantastic question. Other than the real nerdy stuff that I like to read, that is the technical pieces of DER that I just can't digest, if I try to read before bed. But in all seriousness, DER is, I think, one of these items that it doesn't matter at which point you're in. You're going to find yourself embedded in it, and it's so unique. It impacts so many different parts of the organization for any utility, that it becomes extraordinarily complex in terms of processes and how you deal with it. And then obviously volume matters, right? So for us, for JEA, we probably have somewhere around 2,700-ish residential and commercial DER interconnections. That's a mix of both PV and PV plus battery types of installations. We do have about a handful of distribution utility interconnections. And as that volume grows, it's not going to do anything but become more complex, and how the system needs to operate, how we need to handle it and ensure system reliability and stability. So I think not even, getting in front of DER, but just trying to keep up with how fast the technologies are changing is always going to present challenges and opportunities for all utilities, not even the American utilities. I think this is generally speaking, it's going to present challenges across the board for all utilities. So, our goal is, how do we think long-term, or what do we set in place? How do we forecast this? I think the big concern is setting up the right structure and setting up all of the right tools to ensure that we don't fall off the back of the train, and we handle DER the best that we possibly can, and ensure, again, system reliability. So at the end of the day, I think those are probably the most important, or the things that at a high level really kind of keep me motivated, I'll say.
Yeah, like just to kind of touch upon that idea is, like, no matter where you are on the maturity or what the proliferation is of the utility that you're in charge of, just one is enough to start asking the right questions, and then getting the internal stakeholders aligned and aware and tuned in to, we have to continue to keep the lights on from the fundamentals of how the grid worked for 100 years. But there's a shift in really starting to ask questions that hits all stakeholders. And just to name a few is like how the interconnections are told to the utility. And then it impacts the planning. How does you actually plan that grid, knowing there's small proliferation here, but what questions you would ask and change in the decisions you make towards ensuring the grid is able to handle this future proliferation, no matter when it comes. And then it goes into the operations. And then, quite frankly, it touches cybersecurity, compliance. I don't want to leave anyone out, but regulatory, state affairs. So it's a very expansive topic, right? And so I think what's really been powerful about the AEIC group and getting us together is really being able to share that this is happening at all aspects, touching all groups. So what knowledge can we share and then take back into that internal organization? So I just want to give a shout out, like, to AEIC and that membership, but also that, tune into the other podcasts, because not only are we talking to Florida here, but we're talking all across the states, and really the same theme comes up, is that organizational structure and positioning ourselves to really prepare for DER. Since it's such an expansive topic, and I'm going to say it in case we have any new listeners, but DER is not only solar, right? With any distributed generation that our customers want to put on the edge of our grid, it's now this energy efficiency demand response, that there is a new market, new capabilities, data analytics technologies are affordable. So like thermostat control, right? At a much larger level. And then electric vehicles and everything electrification. So that's DER in a nutshell, which touches upon all of what we just talked about. So I'll hand it over to you. Like, what are some of the biggest items, or the biggest in your mind, in regards to what's being explored at JEA?
So another great question. And I would think really the biggest thing related to DER currently at JEA is we have currently engaged in the IRP process, at least for us, in doing an IRP assessment. That's not specifically, to just DER. Obviously, there's a lot of elements that are composed within an IRP, and that process takes quite some time. But I do think that DER is obviously going to be a big part of it. And, what we're hoping to get and expecting to get really from this process is recommendations really on a number of different things. So we want to ensure that JEA is, we continue to have a reliable, resilient system for many, many years to come. So some of the things that we're really diving into, and what we are wanting to get back from specifically this IRP, is things like system reliability and resource adequacy. That's a big one. So obviously when you throw DER into the mix there, things can get quite a bit convoluted. There's a lot of discussion right now around carbon emission reduction goals, future potential regulatory requirements that may, go along with that. For us specifically, we do have some aging generating units. So things like the retirement or the replacement of those aging generation resources, integrating planned and future utility scale solar sites. So that's, again, that's just a small part of the DER. But, Elizabeth, as you mentioned, part of this too is not just those generation resources, but also considering things like electric vehicles, how the proliferation of EVs may impact our territory, and how do we respond to that? Demand response. That's another key item. And we're experiencing quite a bit of growth in Northeast Florida. So that's another item specifically that we want to make sure that we plan as strategically as possible. So, not just that population growth, but the economic growth for Northeast Florida. Outside of the IRP, which we expect to be completed sometime in the timeframe of March of 2023, microgrids is really a big topic right now that has come up for JEA. We've got a myriad of customers in our service territory. So we've got Navy bases, we've got large industrial manufacturing customers, we've got hospitals. So there's been a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversation from a customer's perspective on things like microgrids. So, and how, what potential applications that they may fill a role in. So things like resiliency and whatever the customer's goals are, whatever they may be. So we're in the early stages of exploring how this may look from a JEA perspective, but microgrids is definitely a hot topic right now too.
I have to say, the biggest item, in the end though, it really is it's a web, right? So like, no matter what seat the utility person is sitting in, we now have enhanced grid visibility, right? We know that our number one priority should be, do we have full situational awareness of all assets connected to the grid? And that is something that I believe people outside the utility, maybe within the utility, do not understand, that from a distribution design, we did not need to know all the way down to the edge of the grid based on Ohm's law. But now we do, because the edge wants to be interactive. And then we have our extreme weather conditions. That has always been a question of how resilient are we? So how quickly can we come back after events? But these events are happening more rapidly. The affordability of all of the new technology that I just spoke about, not only for our customers, but for ourselves, how do we embrace them and really innovate, which is something that we have not had to do since, I think, the 70s, if you look back on the history of the power grid. And really this whole idea of DER and enabling markets that have not been designed. So it's very hard to pick the biggest item, because that plays into really, how do we reduce the overall energy burden for our customers? How do we build out resiliency? And and how do we really advance these technologies for all and not just some. So kind of repeating what you said, but it's just such an exciting area to be in. And I'm so excited that I get the opportunity to work with gentlemen like you. And with that, any other last words that you would like for the audience?
Absolutely. No, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you a little bit today about DER. And I would love to echo your sentiments earlier about AEIC. I think it's a fabulous association, just a wonderful playground, if you will, for utilities to really work closely with one another. And although, 2 different or 10 different utilities may not be experiencing the same thing, and we're all over across the board with where we are in our DER journey, I think everybody brings something unique to the table, and the willingness and the opportunity within AEIC to connect the dots and link all of these pieces together. It's a pretty awesome, cool experience. So I'll conclude with that, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Matt.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of All Things DER. Thanks for tuning in. I hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode next week. Until then, keep powering on.